The auction square smelled like rust, sweat, and old blood. Cages lined the center. Some held frightened creatures, others were already empty. But one cage stood apart, not because of its position, but because of what it held inside. She sat. Alone, her head lowered, chains wrapped around her arms, legs, and even her neck. Her skin was a pale silver gray, her hair long and tangled, brushing against the dirty metal floor. She was massive, easily twice the size of a normal humanoid, and 5 times stronger. But she looked defeated, not dangerous. The sellers didn't even shout about her like the others. "She's worthless," one muttered, spitting on the ground. "Too big, too slow, and she can't even breed. What's the use of a female like that?" They laughed and moved on to the next cage, where a smaller alien girl screamed and cried for mercy. But one man stopped, a human, in a dark coat and old boots. Stood still, staring at the giantess. His name was James, and he didn't come here to buy anyone, but something about her made him pause. She lifted her head slowly, expecting to see another pair of eyes full of fear or disgust. Instead, she saw curiosity, and maybe something softer. James stepped closer to the bars. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer at first, only stared at him, unsure if this was another trick. He didn't shout, didn't laugh, didn't back away. The seller came over, annoyed. "Forget her, human. She's not worth the feed she eats." Cast out by her own people, big freak and broken, James didn't look at the seller. He kept his eyes on the giantess, who cast her out. He asked her own kind. The seller shrugged, said she's too large. "Her body can't make children, so what's the point of keeping her? She's no warrior either. Then why is she here?" James asked. The seller smirked. "We thought maybe someone would want her as a guard or pet. Turns out nobody wants a useless giant." James looked back at the giantess. Still, she said nothing, but her eyes had changed. A small flicker of something, hope, or fear of hope. James took out his credit chip. "I'll take her," he said. The seller blinked. "What?" "I said, I'll take her," James repeated, louder. People in the crowd started turning, whispering, pointing. "The human wants her." "Why?" "She's broken. Maybe he's crazy." Chains clanked as the cage opened. The guards hesitated. Before unlocking here, they were afraid, even if she never fought back. James stepped forward. Offering his hand, she didn't take it, but she followed slowly. Walking like someone too used to punishment, no one clapped, no one cheered. Not like with the others, just silence and whispers. Inside James' ship, she sat quietly on the floor, refusing to speak. James gave her a blanket, some water, and left her alone for the night. He didn't lock the door, didn't tie her up. He only said, "If you want to talk, I'll be here," and walked away later that night, when she thought he was asleep. She looked around the room. There were photos, James, with a woman and a baby. But the woman was gone from the recent pictures. Only James and the child remained, until even the child disappeared from the final photo. Her heart ached without knowing why. She sat back down, wrapping the blanket around her wide shoulders. Her mind raced. Why did he buy her? Did he plan to sell her again? Use her? Hurt her? No one ever gave her anything without asking for pain in return. The next morning, James made food. She stared at the plate he offered. Then at him. "Eat," he said. "You're not a prisoner." She took the plate, her hands shaking. The first bite made her eyes water. She hadn't tasted warm food in years. "What's your name?" he asked again. She hesitated, then whispered, "Vera." James smiled. "Nice to meet you, Vera," her name. Said it like it mattered. A long silence stretched between them. Then she asked softly, "Why did you take me?" James looked at her seriously. "Because no one else would," he said. "And because I don't believe you're useless." She stared at him, stunned, for the first time in a long time. What? She didn't feel invisible. She looked down at her large hands. Once meant for holding children she never had. Her voice broke as she asked, "What if they're right about me?" James stood and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then let them be wrong together," he said. "I see something they don't." Vara didn't know what to say, but in her heart, a small spark began to gloat, teeny, fragile but real. She wasn't just a rejected giantess anymore. not to him, and maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be. Asterisk, she didn't sleep much that first night. Even in the warm blanket, even with food in her stomach, Vara lay awake, not because of fear, but because of confusion. Why hadn't he chained her? Why wasn't she locked up like before? Humans were supposed to be cruel, weren't they? But this one, James, was strange. In the past, when someone showed her kindness, pain always followed. A trick, a test, a lie. So she waited, silent, ready for the hurt. But it never came. In the morning, James entered the small living space with 2 mugs of something hot. Steam rose in the cold air. He handed one to her and sat down. Calm, Vara didn't take it right away. Her massive fingers hovered over the small cup, unsure if she was allowed. James nudged it closer, smiling. It's just tea. She picked it up carefully, the warmth soothing her hands. Silence filled the room again. But it wasn't heavy like before. It was peaceful, quiet like morning rain. I cleaned out a room for you, James said suddenly. There's a shower too. Vara blinked, confused. A shower. She repeated slowly, the word foreign on her tongue. Hot water, he said. You'll like it. James led her to a small space near the engine bay. He had reinforced the walls to handle her size, added cushions, blankets, even a mirror. She stood there frozen, staring at the room, not prison gray, but soft beige, a room not made to contain her, but to comfort her. Why? She asked, voice barely a whisper. James tilted his head. Why? What? Why? Do all this for me? He looked at her, serious now. Because you deserve to live like a person. Vara turned away, her throat tight. She entered the shower and locked the door. Water poured over her, and for the first time in years. The dirt and dried blood washed away. Her silver-gray skin shimmered underneath. Her body full of curves and strength, but also softness. She stared at herself in the mirror, not as a monster, but as something more. Maybe not beautiful, not yet, but no longer filthy. Later, she sat at the small table, wrapped in a clean robe. James placed a bowl in front of her, real food again, warm and spiced. She stared at it, blinking, then slowly began to eat. Your people, he said gently. Why did they throw you out? Vara froze, spooned halfway to her mouth. She placed it down, took a breath, and said, My body was too large, too heavy. They said I'd crush any child I tried to carry. Her voice trembled. Doctors, elders, they called me a waste of life. James didn't interrupt. They said I was made wrong, she continued. Not useful as a mother, not built as a warrior, just a burden. She looked away, her voice cold now. So they sent me out. Left me in the desert like trash. James clenched his jaw, hands tightening. No one deserves that. He said I begged them, she whispered, tears forming. I begged them to test again, to give me a chance. But they already made up their minds. Silence returned, but this time it was full of weight. James finally spoke. Earth used to be like that too. Vara looked up, surprised. We feared anything different, too big, too small, too strange, he said. But not everyone stayed afraid. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a small frame, and handed it to her. Inside was a picture of a human woman's soft features, kind eyes, and a baby in her arms. She was my wife, James said, voice low. Our daughter died. After her, Vara stared at the photo, then at him. You lost everything. She said, I thought so. He nodded. Until I saw you in that cage. Vara's breath caught in her throat. You reminded me that some lives still need saving. He stood, turned away, leaving her alone with the photo. For a long moment, Vara didn't move. Then slowly, she touched the glass with her fingertip. The baby in the picture smiled, a frozen memory. Vara blinked, and a tear ran down her cheek. Later that night, James returned to the room to check on her. He found her curled up on the bed he had made, blanket tight around her giant frame. But something caught his eye on the table beside her. The photo frame stood upright, next to. It was a single word scratched into a slip of paper, thank you. He smiled softly, turned out the light, and closed the door as the ship hummed through space. Vara whispered into the dark, "I don't understand you, human, but I don't hate you either." And for her, that was the scariest part. The mirror didn't lie. It showed her the same thing every time: wide shoulders, thick arms, powerful legs, and a belly that had never held life to others. Her size was her shame. To Vara, it had become her curse. She stared at her reflection. Inside the ship's medical bay, the room silent except for the soft hum of machines. The robe James had given her still felt too small, the sleeves barely reaching her wrists. But she didn't care about comfort anymore. She needed truth. James stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching the medic droid scan her body. He'd asked her permission before bringing her here, like always, never forcing, never demanding. But it was her who had said, "Test me, once and for all." The scanner beeped and projected a 3D image in the air. Vara looked away. Afraid to see the same result again, James stepped forward, examining the floating diagram. His brow furrowed. The medic droid spoke. Its voice calm. Subjects: reproductive system is active, though unique in structure. James turned to her. "That means," the droid continued, "her species classifies her as infertile, based on traditional norms." Vara flinched, as if stabbed by words she'd heard all her life, but the droid added, "With a compatible donor, possibly human, successful conception is possible." Silence. Vara blinked, confused. "What?" The droid repeated, "Her biology is not broken, only misunderstood." James turned to her slowly, his voice quiet. "They were wrong, Vara. You're not broken." Her breath caught in her chest. For years she had believed their verdict. Her size made her useless. She had carried that shame like armor. Heavy and cold, and now, one voice, one human machine, had cracked it wide open. But something strange happened then. Vara didn't feel happy. She felt terrified. "No," she muttered, backing away. "No, this can't be true." James stepped forward. "Vara, why would it be true now?" She snapped, her voice shaking. "After all these years, after all the pain." Tears welled up in her eyes, her fists clenched. "If I believe this, and it's wrong, I'll break all over again." She ran, pushing past the droid, past James, down the hallway of the ship. He called out after her, but she didn't stop. The airlock door slid open, and she stepped out into the forest clearing. Where they'd landed to rest, the alien world was quiet, the sky painted in purple and gold. She walked deep into the woods, heart pounding, trees bent as she passed, her heavy steps shaking the ground. Finally, she collapsed by a stream. Breathing hard, she looked at her reflection in the water. And for the first time in days, she saw herself through her people's eyes again. "Lee. Too big, unfit. No one wants you," she whispered to herself. "Not really." But a voice answered behind her. "I do." Vara spun around. James stood there, out of breath, his boots muddy. "I told you not to follow," she said angrily. Wiping her face, "And I never said I'd listen," he replied. Stepping closer, she glared at him. "What do you want from me, human?" "Pity, gratitude." "I want you to stop punishing yourself," he said, his voice gentle but firm. She turned away again, trembling. "You don't know what it's like to be told your body has no worth," she said. "To be cast out like a defective tool." James walked to her side, sat down, and picked up a rock. "My daughter," he said softly, "was born with a heart defect." Vara glanced at him, confused. "She lived for 2 years," he continued. "Doctors said she'd never run, never grow." "Strong," he paused, eyes distant. "But she laughed. She sang, and she made me smile every day." Vara's voice cracked. "What happened?" "She died in her sleep," he whispered. Peaceful for a long time. Neither of them said a word. Then James turned to her. "You think your body isn't good enough to carry life?" "But maybe," he said slowly, "it was just waiting for someone who wouldn't give up on it." Vara looked at her hands, then at him. A breeze passed between them, stirring the leaves. She spoke quietly. And you think you're that someone? I don't know, he said honestly, but I'd be proud to try. Her heart ached in ways she didn't understand. She had been alone so long. Silence had become her only friend, but now this human, this strange, stubborn human kept pulling her back to the light. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But belief was dangerous. It could heal, or it could destroy. She stood slowly, towering above him. James looked up at her without fear.
Wait, whispered.
Well, whispered, then don't leave. He nodded. I won't.
Act.
And for the first time, her shame didn't feel like a curse. It felt like something she could finally let go of. Asterisk lightning split the sky. The storm came fast, too fast. James shouted into the comes Vara. Where are you? But only static answered. She had gone into the forest again, this time alone. Just hours ago, she had stood before him, asking him not to leave, and now she had vanished without a word. Wind howled through the trees, shaking branches and pouring rain in sheets. James grabbed a med pack, slung it over his shoulder, and ran out into the night. His boots sank into the wet earth, but he didn't slow down. He had already lost too much in his life. He wasn't about to lose her. Far ahead, beneath the shadow of a broken cliff, Vera lay curled in a ball. Mud covered her arms. A large gash cut across her thigh. She had slipped on the rocks trying to cross a stream before the storm hit. She wasn't unconscious, but she wasn't moving. She hugged herself tightly, her body shaking from cold. Pain, and something worse, shame. She had believed in James, believed in his words. But the storm outside felt like the storm inside her, loud, violent, and full of doubt. What if he was wrong about her? What if this pain was proof that she was a mistake? Then, above the roar of thunder, she heard footsteps. She didn't lift her head, but she knew that sound. James. He dropped beside her, soaking wet, breathing hard. I told you I wouldn't leave, he said, voice trembling from both fear and relief. You didn't, she whispered, barely audible, but I did. James pulled out the med pack and tore open a bandage. We'll argue later, he muttered. Right now. I need to stop the bleeding. Vara winced as he pressed the patch. Over her wound, her skin was thick. But even giants could feel pain. Still, she didn't cry, not until she saw his hands. They were shaking not from fear, but from how much he cared. He had no armor, no weapons, no backup. He had rushed into an alien storm, just for her. Why? She whispered, teeth chattering. Why would you do this for me? James looked up, meeting her eyes in the dark. Because you're not just someone I saved, he said. You're someone I need, too. Vera froze, the words hitting her. Harder than any wound, he wasn't doing this because he pitied her. He wasn't trying to fix her. He was choosing her. I'm not strong like you think, she said, a tear running down her cheek. I'm scared. I'm tired. And sometimes, I still believe I'm worthless. James leaned closer, brushing the hair from her eyes. You know what I see? He said, I see someone who survived what would have crushed anyone else. I see a woman with more strength in her heart than in her fists, and I see someone who just wants to be held. She let out a broken laugh, then another tear. Slipped down, and James did what no one ever had. He held her not because she needed to be rescued, but because she was worth holding. They stayed that way for a long time, giant and human. Heart to heart, the rain slowed, the thunder faded, and the silence returned. But now, the silence felt safe. Later they returned to the ship. Vara limped slightly, but refused to let James carry her. I'm not weak, she said, with a small grin. I know, he replied, smiling back. But I'll still be here to catch you if you fall, inside the ship. He helped her into bed. Carefully checking her wound again, she watched him quietly, her mind still spinning from everything. He said, You lost your wife and daughter, she whispered. How do you still have space in your heart? James sat down beside her, resting his hand over hers. Because pain doesn't shrink the heart, he said. Sometimes it makes more room. Vara closed her eyes, her breathing slow and steady, and for the first time since she'd been cast out, she didn't feel hollow inside that night she dreamed, but this time, it wasn't of empty cradles or cruel voices. She dreamed of a field of tall flowers, and in the middle of it a child ran into her arms, laughing. She woke up in tears, soft, silent ones. James was still there, sitting in a chair nearby, asleep. She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "Don't give up on me." He didn't wake, but his head nodded slightly, as if he'd heard her in his dreams, and for the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, this strange, stubborn human wasn't going anywhere. The door hissed open with a soft puff of air. Vara stepped inside cautiously, her massive form filling the narrow hallway of the medical outpost. She had never been inside a human facility before. Everything looked clean, small, and strangely warm, not cold and metallic like the breeding labs of her old world. Oh, James walked beside her, keeping pace. He could tell she was nervous. "I told them you're from an unregistered frontier species," he said softly. "They don't know. Your people threw you out." Vara looked down at him, eyes full of uncertainty. "Why lie for me?" James stopped and met her gaze. "Because the truth never helped you before." The human medic inside was older, with gray hair and soft eyes. He looked surprised when Vara entered, but not afraid. "Big girl," he chuckled, "but you carry yourself gentle?" Vara didn't answer, just gave a nod. She didn't trust his lie, not yet. James gave her a look that said try, so she sat on the reinforced scan table without complaint. The machines hummed, lights blinked, and images began forming on the screen. The medic squinted at the data, then frowned. "Strange anatomy," he muttered, "but not broken." Vara didn't breathe. She watched his eyes, searching for the moment when they would fill with disappointment, just like the elders on her planet, but that moment never came. James leaned forward. "Is she?" The medic looked between them. "Fertile." Not in the traditional sense. Vara felt the old pain return, but the medic raised a hand. "Wait," he said, pointing at the scan. "She has something we've only seen in hybrids: adaptive womb tissue. She can't reproduce the way her kind thinks," he continued, "but her body adapts to you." In fact, looking at James, silence, complete, earth-shaking silence. Vara blinked. "What are you saying?" The medic leaned forward, smiling. "I'm saying it's not impossible," he said. "It's just different. With the right bond, the right care, the right partner, her body might allow life to grow." James looked at Vara, his voice caught in his throat. Vara looked away, hands trembling. The hope was too bright, too sharp. She could barely speak when they left the outpost. The forest around them felt too quiet. Vara walked in silence beside him, her eyes lost in the sky. Finally, she said, "If they were wrong all this time, what else did I believe that wasn't true?" James stopped walking, turned to her slowly. "That your body is only good for one purpose," he said. "That you need to fit their rules to matter." He stepped closer. "I never saw you as broken," her voice cracked. "But if it's true, if I really can, then you deserve to choose," he interrupted, "not to be used, not to be forced, but to choose when and with whom you want to create life." Vara stared at him, something shifting behind her eyes. For the first time, her future didn't feel like an empty cavity, felt like a doorway. And she was standing in front of it, terrified to knock that night. She sat on the edge of the ship's sleeping chamber. James was reading something on a small datapad, his eyes flicking up every few seconds to check on her. Finally, Vara spoke. "If I said I wanted to try to have a child," she said slowly, "would you run?" James put the datapad down and looked her dead in the eyes. "No," he said. "I'd hold your hand and walk through it with you." She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "But it's not just about trying," she whispered. "It's about hope. And I don't know if I can survive another broken hope." James got up, walked over, and took her hand in his. "Then let's build a new kind of hope," he said, together. Soft silence wrapped around them like a blanket. No promises, no pressure, just presence. Later that night, she stepped into the shower again. Steam rose up around her. But this time, she wasn't washing off shame. She was preparing for something new, something bold. She placed her hand on her belly, eyes closed. Maybe she wasn't built wrong. Maybe she was just built different, and for the first time. Different didn't mean unworthy. It meant possible. Asterisk, she was gone. The ship door was wide open. Cold morning air slipping inside, James stared at the trail of huge footprints in the soft soil. Heart pounding in his chest, Vara had left without. A word, no note, no goodbye, just silence. He knew that silence too well. It was the same kind that came before someone gave up. The kind that whispered, "You don't deserve love." "Not again," James muttered, grabbing his coat and stepping outside. Not this time. Vara ran for hours, deeper into the forest, past the river and the cliffs. She wasn't fleeing James. She was fleeing herself. She had seen the test. Results, heard the words, "You might be able to carry life," the doctor had said. Might, that word echoed like thunder in her chest. Because might meant hope, and hope terrified her more than rejection ever did. She stood now at the edge of a high hill, wind whipping through her silver hair. Below, valleys rolled like green waves, untouched and quiet if she vanished. Here, no one would find her. She could live wild, alone, forgotten, just like before. No more chances, no more pain, no more waiting for something she'd never have. And yet, she heard his voice in her memory. Then let's build a new kind of hope. Together. Why did those words hurt more than any insult she had ever received? Because she wanted to believe him, and that was the scariest choice of all. Footsteps crunched behind her, slow, careful. She didn't turn around. "You followed me?" she said quietly. James stopped just a few steps behind, out of breath. "I said I wouldn't leave," he answered. "You didn't," she said, her voice flat. "But I might." Silence, the wind howled, bending the trees. Finally, she turned, eyes wet but burning. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I spent my whole life being told I'm wrong shape, wrong size, wrong purpose. Now one machine says maybe, and you think that erases everything." James didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes said enough. "You still believe in me," she said bitterly. "Even when I don't," James stepped forward, his voice low. "Because someone has to. If you walk away now, you're not protecting yourself," he said. "You're letting them win." Vera's hands balled into fists. "I'm tired of fighting," she said, "even with myself." "I don't know if I can give you what you want," James smiled gently. "Who said I want something from you?" "I don't want a perfect body," he continued. "I don't want a child you're not ready for. I want you, Vara," her breath caught. Not because of what he said, but because deep down, part of her wanted him to, not as a savior. Not as a miracle, just as someone who saw her fully and didn't turn away. She looked away, trembling. "If I say yes, to trying, to staying, to everything, what if I fail?" James stepped beside her, placing his hand over hers. "Then we fail together," he said, "and we try again." A bird flew overhead, calling into the wind. The forest was still, as if waiting for her answer. Vara closed her eyes. She felt the fear, the doubt, the echoes of 1,000 cruel voices, but she also felt something else stronger. Deeper hope. When she opened her eyes, they weren't full of tears anymore. They were clear, steady. She turned to James and nodded slowly. "Then I choose you," she said. "I choose to try." A small smile broke across his face, not wide, not loud, but real. He reached up and gently touched her cheek. "Welcome home," he whispered. They walked back together, side by side. Not as broken and rescuer, not as giant and human, but as two people choosing to build something new from everything they'd lost. And as the sun rose behind them, casting golden light over the forest path, Vara didn't feel like a mistake anymore. She felt like a woman standing at the beginning of something powerful. Her body, once called useless, now carried the most precious thing of all, a second chance. The small home stood at the edge of the colony forest. It was simple, built from dark wood and reinforced stone. But it held something no structure ever had for Vara. It held peace. Sunlight poured through the wide windows, falling on polished floors and soft rugs. But what filled the air wasn't just warmth, it was laughter. A tiny voice giggled from the next room, and then came the sound of bare feet. Soft, fast and clumsy, Vara turned just in time, arms outstretched, a small child with soft gray skin. and dark brown hair tumbled into her embrace. "Careful, little one," she whispered. Lifting him effortlessly, the boy squealed with joy, throwing his arms around her thick neck. "Mama!" He laughed, up again. Her heart swelled.
Ow!
So many nights she had dreamed of this, but never truly believed it could be real. Yet here he was, in her arms, warm and alive in hers. From the kitchen, James leaned against the doorframe, smiling at the sight. His hair had a few more streaks of gray now, but his eyes had never been brighter. "How many times is that today?" he asked playfully. Vara looked at him with a smirk. "At least 12, James chuckled. "He's going to be bigger than me by next year." "Already is," she teased, tossing their son gently into the air and catching him with ease. They named him Kalen, a name that meant rebirth in both of their languages. No one had believed she could carry life, even after the tests. Even after the human medic's approval whispers had followed them. "She's too big," she crushed. She's unnatural." But Vara didn't listen anymore. Not after the night she chose hope. The pregnancy had been difficult. Her body strained in ways even earth medicine couldn't fully prepare for. And yet through every ache, every fear, every sleepless night, James stood by her side. When she screamed through labor, when her body shook with pain in the air, filled with the scent of blood and tears, she reached out blindly and his hand was there, holding hers, never letting go. "I see you," he had whispered then. "You're not alone." And when the baby cried, when Kalen took his first breath, Vara had cried too, because in that moment, everything her people ever said about her shattered. She was not broken. She was not cast out. She was not a waste. She was a mother. Now, as the boy curled against her chest and began to doze, Vara rocked him slowly. James stepped forward, wrapping a soft shawl around them both. "You're still glowing, you know," he whispered. Kissing her forehead, she smiled. "I used to hate my size, and now—" He asked. "I thank the stars for it," she whispered, looking down at the child. "Because I wouldn't trade this moment for anything." Outside, the neighbors were setting up for the yearly gathering. A mix of humans, aliens, hybrids went, scattered by war. Now, united by something stronger, James and Vara would walk there together later. Holding hands, holding their son, they wouldn't need to explain anything. Their presence said enough, as Kalen began to snore softly. Vara looked out the window. Eyes full of memory, she remembered the cage, the market, the filth. She remembered how it felt to believe she had no future. And now she stood wrapped in love with a child in her arms, a man who never stopped believing in her. "They said I was too big to reproduce," she whispered. James heard her but didn't interrupt. She kissed her son's forehead. "But maybe I was just big enough to carry the kind of life no one else could." And outside, as the sun dipped low and stars began to blink awake, a new story began, not one of shame, but of strength. Not of what she was told she couldn't be, but of what she chose to become. A mother, a partner, a legend. The giant they cast out had become the heart of a new family, and the future was hers to hold.